everybody, welcome back to the Dice Tower. My name is Zee Garcia.
And I'm Camilla.
Today we're taking a look at Earthborne Rangers here, which is a card game, campaign card game, in which you are going to be cooperating with the other players, the other rangers in this world, moving about this valley, moving about this region, exploring different things, interacting with the people who live there, going on little missions, finding little quests, but generally inhabiting this sort of futuristic world in which nature has become very important to these people, and they attempt to live harmoniously with that nature.
It's an experience.
It's a bit of an experience game, right? It's sort of a new style of game, which is very much about just sort of habitating or existing in a setting, in a world, and letting that kind of wash over you,
right?
In a way. So we'll go ahead and take a look at how the game works. I'll give you an overview of, the mechanisms in it. We'll come on back. We'll tell you what we think of it. The game's going to be played as a campaign between 1 and 4 rangers, and you are going to be tracking the days that you spend in the campaign up here. It will end when you get to the end, and you are going to be spending those days traveling around the valley and having encounters with people and beings and various other events in the valley. There are many locations in the valley, such as meadow, branch, white sky, and then paths between them that denote which cards you'll be encountering while you are having your adventure that day. When you choose to travel, you may choose to camp, and at that point the day would end and you put the game away and start the next one next time. Or if something happens, like you're exhausted or someone is injured, then the game might force the day to end, and at that point you put it away, and again you can start the next day next time you play. You'll be writing down missions and your progress in them. You'll get rewards, which are cards you can add to your deck when you go from one day to the next. And then notable events you can write down here as well. And of course, they only give you one of these, so you can photocopy that or, whatever, and use that, or you could write right on it, of course. So there you go. That's a general overview. Let me go ahead and show you what one player's area would look like and give you a brief idea of what the rounds are going to play as and how the game would develop. So here we're taking a look at one player's area. I've got my things down here. This is me. I began with this in play. This is a possible card I would play in the game. And then I've got over here this card, which is part of my deck. And when I select my deck building, I pick it, and it tells me what I'm good at, basically. So, for example, my focus is 3. So I have 3 of these tokens, whereas spirit up here I only have 1, 2 in awareness, 2 in fitness, all right? So that's me, and I've got a hand of cards as well, my deck over here. And then in the center of the table, we've got a location, which is where we are traveling to. It has a setup at the beginning, and then you flip it over to the back, or to the front, I suppose. You've got weather over here, which is going to be affecting us, and it's going to change throughout the campaign based on what day it is. And then we've got a couple of decks over here. This one here is made of the location and the path that we traveled. Some cards shuffled together, things we're going to be contending with. And this one over here is the challenge deck. It is going to be used whenever we make a test. You're going to be drawing from that to see if there's a modifier for that test, as well as some other cascading things that the world reacts to, all right? Let me go ahead and show you the round structure card here, and I will take you briefly through this and then explain a couple of other things. So, here's what a round looks like. At the beginning, you're going to draw path cards from this deck. Each player will do this, and then you deal with that card. That card is going to go either, based on the arrow up here, within reach, which means in front of you, the player who drew it, or along the way, which means in the center of the table, basically where these things are, which would not be so close to me if I wasn't showing you this on camera. This would be in the center of the table, and this card has an arrow pointing down, so it goes within reach of me. But if the arrow was pointing up, it would go in the center of the table. Kind of affect everybody. Once everyone's done that, then we are going to take ranger turns. We can do this in whatever order we want to, but not twice in a row. And so I could go, another player could go, then I could go again, and the third player could go. And this is going to be, on your turn, you do one of 3 things. You can play a card. To play a card, You are going to, as I already showed you, I had a card out here. I could play this card here. It's a gear and attack. It's going to stay out on the table. It's going to cost me 2 focus. So I would spend 2 focus and put this card out, okay? I could perform a test, and we'll come back to that, but that means trying to achieve something, and there are tests all over on everything. There is a test here where I can ask her some information. I can search this location, and that's a test, as well as some common tests that we are going to have in the game. And this is your list there with 4 common tests that you can do pretty much at any time, all right? And then the other one would be resting, like I said, which is basically passing. Once we've all rested, then we go to the travel phase, in which if we have enough tokens on this card, we could travel, move on to someplace else. And then lastly, the refresh phase, where we ready everything. If it's exhausted, and then we draw a card, go to the top of the next round. You can choose to, when you travel, end the day and basically camp and put everything away and get ready for the next time you play. The day also might be ended for you if somebody gets hurt, if your deck runs out, that sort of thing. There's a few things that might trigger it, or the story might trigger it, okay? When you draw this person, you are going to read an entry, as it says up here, entry 49, from the book. This story book right here has a bunch of entries. So you would read that, find out a little bit about what she's doing, maybe what she wants. And then we can interact with her to find out a little more. So in this game, you're going to be doing what's called clearing a lot of cards. And so for her, for example, it says if we clear her, then we're going to read that 49 again, and it'll tell us, well, if you cleared her, then read this instead. And the clearing a character has to do with this right here. It takes 3 per ranger progress. And these are the progress tokens. She would also be cleared if she takes damage, by the way, but we don't want that. You can also clear this one over here. Again, 3 per ranger. And various other things will have, abilities or necessities for you to clear them. So let's talk about tests, okay? That's over here. These are the common tests, plus, again, the ones printed on everything. There are these 4 aspects that I have. So the awareness, spirit, fitness, and focus. And there's also approaches. Every test in this game is a combination of 2 of those things. So, for example, this traverse test is fitness plus exploration, which is what that symbol is. And you can see that on the back of the rule book here. These are the aspects: awareness, focus, fitness, and then connection, conflict, exploration, and reason. And like I said, every test then would be a combination of those 2 things. So if I was doing a test for avoiding something, some animal, some predator is in the way and I want to avoid it, I want to exhaust that thing and avoid it, then I would do this avoid test. I would have to spend at least 1 awareness. Let's say I spend just 1, and then I could enhance that with these symbols from my hand. So this is what my hand looks like. Perhaps I would spend these 2, and I'm looking just at the symbols here, and now my total is 3, okay? I then flip over one of these cards and see if it modifies that. It's an awareness test. So I go there, and the modifier is 0. So 3 is my total, and then I would see what that test did as I was trying to, again, avoid that thing or traverse on a region, or this one here, which is connecting with someone and putting these progress tokens on there. These are, again, the basic ones that you can do. Once that's done, this symbol down here is going to trigger effects on characters and things and what have you. For example, the weather. If this had been the blue mountain symbol, and that test added any progress, then I get to add an additional one because it's a perfect day. It's a clear day. This one over here triggers her ability, and if there was any predator, the predator might attack her. So that's how that works. These modifiers don't have a lot of variance, by the way. They are zeros or minus ones or plus ones, and rarely a -2, which is also going to trigger the deck being shuffled. So this -2 here means that this happens, and then we have to shuffle this deck and the discard again. All right. So that is what taking a test looks like. And like I said, they are on many cards, as well as these common ones over here. So that is the general flow in the game. Once you refresh at the end of a round here, you get these back, you draw your card, and you do it again. You go through this round structure again. Sometimes in the game, you're going to take fatigue. Whenever something fatigues you, you take a card from the top of the deck, turn it sideways, and place it aside. And this can build up as you take multiple instances of fatigue. If anything soothes fatigue, you can draw cards from here directly into your hand. If you ever take a wound, and you can't have too many of these, but if you ever take one, then everything in fatigue is immediately discarded and gone. So that's something to watch out for. There you go. That's pretty much the flow of the game. There's a lot of cards I'm not going to show you or go into, but I want to give you an idea of what, how the moving parts kind of came together so you'd know what's going on. Let's go ahead and go back up top. All right, there we go. So that is the overview for Earthborne Rangers. This is kind of a living card game in a bit. It's sort of how it feels to me. And that makes sense because some of the folks who worked on this game are ex-Fantasy Flight people. And so this one feels a little bit like the Lord of the Rings living card game, a little bit like the Arkham Horror living card game. But it's really its own thing, and it has its own cadence, its own pace, and very much its own world. And I think that's where we should jump in first, actually, is the setting for this game. And hand in hand with that, the production of the game, where they were trying to make the game in a very green way, make it very, I don't know, green. I don't know how else to describe that. So, and that was a big push for it, and that sort of dovetails into the theme. It's a cool setting for sure.
I really like it a lot.
Yeah.
It's its own world, and it's unique enough to feel like its own world, but I would by no means call it fantasy. It's not so far removed from our world that it's completely different. I think it really walks that line well with being familiar enough to us and relatable, but also unique and standing apart.
It's like sci-fi, really, is more what it is. It's not fantasy, and I love, again, the mixture of people living in this forest and moving through the forest, and has like sort of those fantasy trappings, but like the technological equipment they have is very much way futuristic tech.
It's interesting for it to be so futuristic, yet it's not primitive. It doesn't, but it has that look where they're wearing the furs and they're very in touch with the nature and part of it and incorporating it. You can see that they live off the land and have this symbiotic relationship with it and stuff, and you see that, but yet they have some really cool tech pieces.
Right.
And so it's an interesting meld of that. It's you would first blush just looking at it. You're thinking, oh, it's going to be, the hunters and gatherers kind of look, but it's not, because you look a little further, you get more equipment, you start looking into it. You're like, no, this is futuristic, and so it's a really cool meld of that.
Yeah.
Really unique.
Yeah, and the cover doesn't really give you that. Actually, you kind of have to dive into the game a little bit more to get that. In the cover, it does look a little more fantasy-ish, maybe, it doesn't tell you
whimsical,
than
it is, because I wouldn't call it either of those two things.
Right.
The cover definitely looks I guess the cover to me says yes, they were going for very eco-friendly kind of look and design, and that jumps out, I think, immediately. And I think you were maybe going into this, so I hope I'm not jumping ahead too much. I like a lot of the decisions that they made in the production, keeping it that eco-friendly. I have no problems with the cards. In fact, I enjoy the cards that come wrapped in the paper that I can then recycle, things like that. I think the cardboard is still good quality, even knowing that it comes from those sources. And if you did get the upgraded ones, I had a chance to play with them. The wood is really solid wood as well. And so it didn't feel like it compromised any of the production for that, with the exception of the insert.
Yeah, the insert's rough.
It is abysmal. It is so bad. I am furious anytime I have to put this game back out or put it in and take it out. It's just immediately, I was like, there's cardboard. You could have come up with something better. It was so very low effort.
Yeah, I wonder if no insert would have been better, or just do the old Fantasy Flight card trench.
Right.
Which is how they did it, mostly for shipping. But that might have been better. The sort of 3x3 squares, very floppy. It's not great. It's the one thing that production-wise, I'm like, nah.
Right, they totally missed it. That, and then the cards, the dividers. I mean, yeah, give me a trench and the dividers. Cool, they gave me the dividers, but they're not tall enough. You can't read the dividers. Well, first of all, it's like 6-point font or something like that. But then half of that 6-point font is down below the cards.
Yeah.
So it's just like, the production is so on point and everywhere else. The card quality, I think the imagery on it, it's the symbology on it, the quality of the components, it's all on point except for that. I'm like, what happened, guys? I mean, fellas, come on.
Yeah, that was a weird, like, the insert is one of those things that I'll feel bad a little bit going against the sort of green, eco-friendly push of the game, but it's got to go.
Absolutely.
I'm not keeping that insert. The couple of things here, I kind of want to start talking about some of the complaints I have for the game.
Okay.
Because generally it'll be a positive review from my point of view, but I want to talk about some of the issues I had with the game. And I'm going to start with complexity, just at the top. This is a complex game. This is a game that has a lot of moving parts. This is a game that there's this balance between them being very thematic. And I appreciate that. And they mention as much in the rule book where they're like, instead of saying, pass this test, add this card to your table, to your area, blah, blah, blah. They try to wrap up everything in a thematic language. And so I pass this test and discuss with this person their interests so that you can draw 2 cards or whatever. You know what I mean? Like they sort of add in italicized flavor text in between the 2 really relevant parts of the writing.
Yeah.
And I think it adds a little complexity to the game. I appreciate thematically what it's doing, but it adds a little complexity to the game. And just overall, the game is a complex game. There's a lot of moving parts. It's a tricky game to get going and understand it all and even just kind of grasp what you ought to be doing, what I should be doing.
And I think it has a really unique flow to it, and that's where some of the complexity comes from, is you have your, and I'm going to mess these words up, or these terms, so please correct me, but you have your nearby, which is right in front of you, right?
What are they called?
Anyway, you have like your area right in front of you, which is yours, and then if you want to go to one of the other players, you can go to that as long as you're not going through something else, or if you go through the top, then you're going through this other place, and so you have this kind of almost mental flow chart on the or map on the table that you have to keep part of, and so that it makes it a little. I think it's complex, but the complexity is a little fiddly. Where you have to kind of, it's not like, I've definitely played more complex games with a lot more going on, but this one feels more complex than it is because the complexity is fiddly and a little bit more of exceptions to the exceptions, which you're going to find in a lot of card games anyway. Like, yes, you have to go through these guys, so they're going to do fatigue to you unless they're friendly or unless this or unless that. So there's a lot of exceptions to that, which just builds into that fiddly nature of the complexity. But once you get it, I think it flows really well. It's just quite a bit of effort that first couple sessions to get there.
I agree, and I think a big push that they were talking about was this idea of the world is sort of alive and reacts to things that are just happening. Mainly that comes from every time you make a test, you flip over the card and the bottom symbol makes stuff happen in the world.
Oh.
I like that mechanically. I think it's interesting. I don't think it makes the world feel alive. You know what I mean? I did not at any point feel like see the world be alive. You know what I mean? It's like...
That's interesting. I think
it's mechanical. Like, it does feel like, I hope it's not the red thing because the predators attack. Or, I hope it's not the sun because then it's hot and I take a heat because of the... I don't know. It didn't feel... It still felt mechanical and therefore a little bit fiddly, and I appreciate the push. I like that. But that feeling of the world will come alive before your eyes because of this one thing that triggers the world evolving and breathing and moving and things interacting in ways you didn't expect. I found that a little fiddly.
Interesting. I think thematically I connected to it a little bit more with, if I do this, everything is going to react. Now, what is that connection to? If it was the sun or the mountain or the valley or whatever, that showed up in the card, I don't know. But that is one thing that again, back to the fiddliness of the complexity, I often forgot to trigger that. Or in what order? Do I trigger that first and then my actions? So if it scares off one of the predators that's here, or do I do my action first, which was connect to that predator, so then it's gone? I had to constantly remind myself of that flow.
And I think that flow, and I think the fact that the game is generally sort of, not wishy-washy, I don't want to say wishy-washy, but sort of hands-off. It gives you a world in which to play and go, and says, go play. I think, and I'll come back to that as a positive, by the way, but I think it does a couple of things that I didn't really like. One of them is, it can be frustrating sometimes to make things happen. Mm-hmm. And I had at least one session, which I found very frustrating, where you just cannot get things to line up.
Right.
You pass, you miss a couple of tests, you don't draw the card you need for the whatever, and it's just a frustrating, grindy experience where you're just like, nothing's working out.
Right.
Nothing's lining up here.
Right.
If it sings, it sings. And somebody shows up, I talk to them, they tell me their story. I'm like, yeah, I'll go fish with you, I'll do this. Oh, it works out. And sometimes just like,
yeah.
And it just doesn't work.
I think part of that is because in the similar games that we've talked about, The Lord of the Rings and Arkham Horror, there's always an action to just draw a card. Yes, it's one of your 3 actions, but you can draw a card. Or one of your actions, but you can draw a card. That's Arkham Horror specifically. In this, there's not. Even to go through your deck and get another card in hand is a test in itself.
Yes.
So there are some of those digging moments where you're like, this whole round, I'm just trying to get a hand to be able to do something, to pass this test that I failed 3 times because I'm not getting the right symbol or the right this or that. So there's not quite as much, I think, mitigation, maybe natural mitigation.
And the tests are smaller. Like there is a smaller variance there.
Yes,
you know what I mean? Which is interesting. I like that. But I don't know how I'd call it the mitigation, but it is sometimes you just can't get some things to line up for you.
I think that's it. Yeah, maybe not mitigation, but that setup. You can't set yourself up where you're like, I feel confident in this test, as often. And one goes wrong, and sometimes it's more of a snowball. But that being said, on a positive note of that, the testing system in this is one of my favorite things I do out of all the games, out of the Lord of the Rings, Marvel Champions. I guess they don't have tests, but and Arkham Horror. I keep forgetting that one.
Yeah.
This is my favorite way to test. You know the stats, you turn the cards over, the worst one is a -2, and when you get that -2, you reshuffle the deck. Like, I love the testing system in this. I think it's so that you innately have the 4 different elements there that you contribute to it, so even if you don't have a card, you can still do the test. Like, this testing system sung for me. I absolutely adored it.
It's pretty clean. I like it. Cool. It's pretty clean. So I agree with you there. I like that mechanically. I like that very much. Now, the other thing I am going to talk about here that I thought was a negative was sometimes in a session, because of the way the sessions end, you can almost finish something. And that thing, when you almost finish it, washes away. Yeah. That sucks. If you get caught in that, where you're like, oh, I need to connect with this person, or they want me to take them somewhere, or whatever. And you get 5/6 of the way there, and then the day has to end, or you need to rest, or whatever. That really sucks, because that progress is washed away.
It's gone. And then if you ever want to get it again, you have to
much.
dig and find that, and then, you have to set it up right.
The other thing, and this is my final negative, and then I'll switch over to some positives here, is that I found the deck evolution. Deck building's neat in this game. I like the way that you build a deck, and it's sort of, you take from who you are and your aspects in life, the things you believe in, the things that, how you want to traverse the world, and you make a deck, and I like that. But I found the deck evolution, once you start playing a campaign, to be very slow. You don't change your deck a lot, and I wish it was closer to Arkham Horror.
Yes.
In which, when you go through a campaign, almost every single session, they're like, and here's some stuff, and here's some stuff, and you can change it in and change it out, and do kind of, you can manipulate your deck a little bit more in Arkham Horror. In this one, you don't change that much.
Right.
You'll get a couple of cards here, a couple of cards there, but I guess on the one hand, you're like, well, you get really comfortable with your one deck of cards. Yeah, that's great, but I want to see a little more evolution.
There's definitely more of a focus in the deck building in the beginning, the setup of the campaign, than there is in it, because you also don't have a lot of choices in the deck manipulation later. As in, you complete a quest and therefore you get access to this one card, this one reward card.
Yeah.
Well, hopefully that works out and it's something that you want or not. It's not like, oh, cool, I have these points. Let me look through this and see where I want to. I don't feel like I quite have this element down. Let me see how I can tweak that. You don't really have that. But Because I guess on the other side of that, they do spend a lot of time in the prologue helping you build that deck.
Yeah.
You know, do this step. Okay, now play this for a couple little minutes so you understand how that works. Great. Now go pick an attribute and add that in. And now play that a little bit. Great. Now go and put in a personality. So they really kind of guide you through that deck building. But then after that, you're right, it kind of comes to a hard stop, you know, on any of that. One other negative that I want to say before we go to positives, because again, I have a lot of good to say. I found, and this might go into what you were saying, sometimes just things aren't lining up. I found a couple times, my most frustrating thing is sometimes I had attributes left over. And in some of the other ones, if you have that left over, it stays out on the table. But Lord of the Rings, you know, if you have the power tokens or whatever they're called out there, that sticks out over for next round because you're building up for something.
Sure.
There's none of that. You have, this is what it is, and every day that is what you get. I understand thematically, but there were multiple rounds that I stopped because I was done with plays or what I could do or what test I felt like I could pass, and I have things left over, and that just doesn't feel like you're optimizing as well. For some reason, it doesn't feel as good because you know you're not just saving up for something bigger later.
Yeah.
It's more, it's just lost.
Yeah.
And that didn't feel as great. It just wasn't as rewarding as I found in some of the other ones that I think are very in this same vein of gameplay.
Yeah, no, I agree with you there, and I think that's going to dovetail a little bit and maybe be softened a little bit how much that stings. If we take a look at the game structure, and by that I mean the campaign, because this campaign is really, really interesting. This is basically, it's not like any other campaign I've ever played. Maybe the closest thing I can compare it to is playing Sleeping Gods, where they're hey, you have 30 days. Here's a valley populated with people and animals and stuff and whatever. Here's 30 days for you to live in it. Go.
Go build your campaign.
We don't care where you start.
Yeah.
We don't care how much you do each day. We don't care where you go. Go live in this world for 30 days. That is radical. It is a wild concept. There is no real starting point and ending point. You just kind of do whatever you want, in your campaign, and just live in this world for, those distinct sessions.
Right. And I think I definitely had a very emotional journey I went through as I was processing that. At first, it felt very shapeless and with no direction. You're like, but wait, that's all? I just do whatever I want. But what is my quest? What am I trying to do? Well, I don't know. I'll find out tomorrow, in the next session. And it felt very shapeless at first. But the more I got into it, I think the more I appreciated that flexibility, because it really is. It manages to feel like a campaign, but focus on the single episode, if that makes sense, because it's like there's very few things that are going to persist round to round. So each time you get down, it's not like, where were we? Who did we need to talk to again? What were we doing? It's very clean session to session.
Yes.
And I really came to appreciate that the more I played into it. It became less shapeless and more free form.
Yes. The other one it reminds me of that you just reminded me of in your description is kind of like Lands of Galzir.
Oh,
it's just like a world that's open, and you just sort of go and poke and walk around in it. You know what I mean? It's just like, what are you trying to do? Whatever I want. I can go talk to people. Hey, you found someone along the bank of a river. You want to talk to them? No. Then don't.
No. Just leave them there.
Do something else. You know what I mean? Like, and you'll come around and maybe meet them again. It's a world that feels... They managed to nail it and make that feel like a place you can visit. In a way, it's very, very video gamey, like open world video gamey, but it feels like discrete sessions that make sense. The structure and the mechanisms in this game are very impressive and very fresh.
Right. It's very much the world is changing and you are experiencing it that day. Because your last session, you will have sessions where you change... I'm trying to think how to explain it. Change the deck. Like move this card to this other part of the deck so that if you go on that terrain next time, that's shuffled in. Like you will permanently change the structure of this world as you go. And that's really cool. It feels like you are in this world experiencing it day by day and wherever the world is at that day.
Yeah,
it's really interesting.
It has a memory for some things, and that's really interesting, So on the other hand, I do wish that maybe that they had more like one-shot, the ability to play one shot. You can get that online, by the way. If you go to their website, they have like one-shot campaigns or whatever, one session. And I'm always like, I like a game if it's campaign to have a one-shot ability or mode included in there. It doesn't, but you can get it online, A, and B, it's just such a weird campaign that doesn't feel demanding. I can just kind of jump in wherever the campaign had me last time. I can play days 1 through 6, put this away, come back in a year, and it's not going to be that big a deal. Just jump into that day.
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
It's not that different. Like, I'm not in the middle of a story arc necessarily.
Right.
You know?
I agree.
So there we go. A lot here, a lot to unpack in this game. A lot of good, a lot of bad, in my opinion. But generally, I am fascinated by it, and it took some heavy lifting, I'll be honest. It took some getting used to it, getting over frustration, understanding what it was trying to do, getting accustomed to it. This game, I think, is a bit of an acquired taste, and it's going to be that way to a lot of people. But for me, because I like these other card games, these living card games that are, that share some DNA with this one, it's when I eventually got there with, and I've, like you said, the campaign idea, the world has really grown on me. So I'm going to come down on an 8 on this one. I like it. There's some things that hold it back from a higher score from me, but I enjoy going back, and it's exciting to think about the future in which these campaigns get finished and I can go back to the drawing board and start a new character, do something radically different with my deck building and character creation, and try again. See who I run into this time. That's exciting and something I'm very much looking forward to.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to have a campaign where you're not like avoiding spoilers or anything like that either.
Sure,
I think that's really interesting because, again, the world is what it is and you're just experiencing it. So I'm coming down at the exact same score.
Oh, really?
8. Yeah, I'm at 8 as well. I think a lot of what held it back was, the little qualms that we talked about, but also the game length. You need to know you're sitting down in a 2-player game. You're sitting down to probably, at least 2 hours, probably closer to 3.
Yeah, it's long.
If you're sitting down with 4 players, budget 5 hours. Like it goes really, really long. So you need to know that. That's not a drawback necessarily to me, but it is an inhibitor to getting it to the table sometimes. Sure. But I do think that 2 players is best, and it's where I really enjoyed that payoff in the ratio. I loved the world. I love what they're doing. You feel like they're going the eco-friendly without being cheap or cutting corners. That they're also incorporating it into the gameplay, and it's just a really neat experience that I keep thinking about. I want to get in and see what I'll discover in this next session. Not resolve the last session and see where that goes, but I want to see what new things this world is bringing today and experience that. So I'm really enjoying it. I think the campaign's fantastic. A 30-day campaign is manageable without being too, you don't have to dedicate your whole life. This doesn't have to be a lifestyle game like some of the others. It's definitely pop in and pop out of this world. And I appreciate that in this style of game. It's not as intimidating to jump into as some of the others at this point that have been around for longer. So for me, Earthborne Rangers, it's an 8. I'm definitely enjoying the world and want to keep going.
Well, there we go, folks. That is it for this one. Earthborne Rangers, 8 out of 10 for both of us. That is a seal of approval. And that's going to do it. My name is Zee Garcia.
And I'm Camilla.
Enjoy your trekking through Earthborne Valley. Yeah, let's go with that.
Sure.